Shaw hadn't planned to be outside when the storm started, but plans didn't matter much on the edge of nowhere. Above him, the sky rippled with silent fury, sheets of blue lightning dancing across the black heavens like spectral veins. They didn't strike, not really. They bled across the ion-choked sky and hummed like a broken frequency inside his helmet. The electromagnetic interference crackled faintly in his ears. It was always like this near the wreck zones. Old scars of forgotten wars still bleeding static and silence. Shaw stood alone on a cracked ridge, the wind tugging at his coat. The terrain below was a sea of ruin, jagged stone, rusting metal, and the scattered skeletons of war machines whose names no one remembered. This world, unnamed on most maps, was an old battlefield turned graveyard. Every gust of wind carried the scorched scent of ozone and burned fuel. He should have turned back, but something had pulled at him. An instinct, maybe. Or guilt. The signal had come in an hour ago, faint and distorted, bouncing through long-dead satellites and barely functioning comm buoys. It wasn't marked human. The transmission carried no distress code he recognized, just a low-frequency pulse repeating every 10 seconds. He shouldn't have answered it. He wasn't a soldier. Not anymore. Not since Miren. But Shaw didn't ignore distress calls. Not anymore. He moved with purpose, careful over the broken terrain, his boots crunching ancient glass beneath the dust. The ridgeline dipped toward a collapsed structure, twisted steel ribs jutting out of the earth like the bones of a great beast. His HUD flickered again as he approached, life form detected, weak, fading. Then he saw her. At first she looked like another corpse, just another lost soul among the thousands who had died here. But the color of her skin gave him pause. Soft, mossy green, slick with blood and dust. She was curled awkwardly beneath a shattered slab of armor, her long black hair matted with dirt and blood. She was breathing, barely, shallow, uneven gasps that scraped through her throat like each one might be her last. Her armor was scorched and cracked, ceremonial in design, black plating etched with flowing alien script. Her shoulder bore a strange emblem, a stylized flame curling into the shape of a bird. But it was her body language that struck him most. Even unconscious, she was tense, a fighter who'd fallen mid-battle and hadn't stopped resisting, even in sleep. Shaw knelt beside her, the stench of burnt ozone mixed with the sharp, almost metallic scent of her blood. It stained her side slick and violet, leaking through the cracked seams in her armor. His medkit beeped as it scanned her vitals. Internal trauma, hemorrhaging, organ damage. Whatever had happened here, she shouldn't have survived this long, and without help, she wouldn't last another hour. She shouldn't be here alone, not a warrior of her caste. The Valari never traveled solo, unless they'd all died, or abandoned her. He hesitated. Once, a long time ago, he'd waited too long to help. He still saw the boy's face sometimes. Miren's little brother, shot in the stomach, crying for help through the haze of fire and smoke. Shaw had been too scared, too slow. This time he moved. He sliced open the ruined plates of her armor with surgical precision, careful not to expose her too much to the cold air. The cut was deep, but missed the lung. He injected clotting foam, applied synthetic skin patches, and slipped a portable heat pad beneath her. His fingers trembled slightly as he worked. Not from fear, from memory. As he reached to check her pulse again, her hand shot up and seized his wrist. Her grip was weak but firm, driven more by instinct than strength. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he saw the warrior behind the wound. They were luminous. Silver shot through with threads of deep blue, almost like nebulae trapped behind her pupils. She focused on his face as if she were trying to memorize it. Then slowly she raised her free hand and placed her palm directly over his heart. Shaw froze. Her touch was light, too light to feel through his suit, but something in the gesture made him tense. The moment felt sacred, ritualistic. She said something. The words were soft, melodic, spoken with breathless reverence. Her fingers lingered on his chest for 3 full heartbeats. Then the faint glow around her skin flickered, and she collapsed into unconsciousness again. He stood there stunned, her hand sliding limply from his chest. The silence pressed in again, broken only by the low hum of failing systems and the faint whimper of wind through broken steel. He didn't know what had just happened, but somehow it felt like a promise. It took him almost 40 minutes to get her back to the outpost. The small facility was barely more than a maintenance station, 3 rooms, low power, and no med team. But it had heat, shelter, quiet. Shaw carried her the whole way, cradled in his arms like she might shatter if he shifted wrong. Her body was heavier than it looked, dense with muscle and armor plating, but he never once thought to put her down. He laid her on the medbed, connected her to every monitor he had, and let the machines do what they could. Half his supplies weren't calibrated for her species, but he improvised, adapted. She didn't wake. Not even when he cleaned the blood from her skin, not even when he whispered, "You're safe now." Later, while the storm raged outside and the lights flickered overhead, Shaw sat against the far wall, watching her breathe. He didn't know who she was, why she'd been out there alone, why her people hadn't come, but he couldn't shake the image of her hand over his heart, the words she'd spoken. They echoed in his mind even now, even though he didn't know their meaning. She'd chosen him. That much he could feel. He just didn't know for what. A rustling noise jolted him from his half-sleep. The outer door hissed open. Standing in the threshold was a creature he barely recognized. Thin, robed in salvaged rags and wires, skin like old leather, eyes too large for its skull. Not Valari, not human, something older, native to the ruins. The figure spoke in broken English. "You take her in." Shaw stood slowly. She was dying. "You let her touch your heart." He frowned. "What does that mean?" The alien tilted its head, voice rasping like dust on stone. "She gave the Calvar, heart binding, ritual from the old flame lines. She chose you, life debt and soul bond. You are hers now." Shaw's blood went cold. "That can't be what it sounds like." "It is. She touched you as mate, spoke your joining words. You are linked until death." Then the creature stepped back into the storm and vanished. Shaw didn't sleep that night. He watched the alien woman, still unconscious, still breathing, and tried to understand what he'd done. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't understood. But a part of him, deep and quiet, whispered that maybe he had been waiting for something like this all along. He didn't even know her name. But as the storm outside quieted to a low electric hum, Shaw leaned forward and brushed a piece of hair from her face. There was a mark just beneath her collarbone, barely visible under the edge of her bandages. A tattoo, a flame curling into the shape of a bird. The same one from her armor. Whatever she was, whoever she'd been before she collapsed in his arms, she hadn't meant to survive. But she had. And now, for reasons neither of them yet understood, she was his. And he was hers. The first thing she did when she woke up was reach for her weapon. Shaw had just finished running another diagnostic sweep on the med unit when the motion caught his eye. The alien woman's fingers twitched, then flexed, searching the air beside her as if muscle memory was already readying for a fight. Her breathing hitched. Her head turned sharply. He stood immediately, hands up, non-threatening. "You're safe," he said quietly. Her eyes snapped open. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Her silver eyes locked on his, narrowing with recognition or confusion. Her breathing deepened as her body adjusted to wakefulness, and Shaw could see every muscle in her frame coiled like a spring. The glow behind her pupils flared faintly. Then she sat up with a suddenness that sent the medical readouts into a frantic chorus of beeps. Pain stabbed through her side, her expression twisted, but she didn't cry out. She gritted her teeth and reached toward the side of the bed, clearly expecting to find a weapon there. There was nothing. "Easy," Shaw said again, stepping slowly toward her. "You're hurt. You lost a lot of blood." Her gaze darted around the room. Walls, corners, exits, calculating. Only after a long, tense pause did her shoulders ease by the smallest fraction. Not submission, not trust, but a decision not to strike. Yet. "You remember what happened?" Shaw asked, voice calm, deliberate. She stared at him. Then slowly she nodded. "Good. That was something." Shaw crossed the room and brought a small hydration pouch to her side. She eyed it suspiciously. "It's clean," he said. "Human standard, but it won't harm you." She didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she tilted her head and studied him like he was a puzzle she hadn't quite figured out. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, resonant, like stone dragged across silk. "Shaw." His breath caught slightly. It wasn't just that she'd remembered his name. It was the way she said it, as though it was important, as though she was marking it with intention. "Yeah, that's me." He hesitated. "Do you have a name?" She didn't answer. Instead, she lowered her gaze and pressed her fingers to her chest, just over the spot where her wound had been treated. Her expression shifted, faint, almost imperceptible. A shadow of vulnerability passed across her face. When she looked back at him, there was no anger, only wait. You saved me, she said in halting English. I did. She inhaled slow and deliberate. You accepted Calvar. The term hit him like a puzzle piece being forced into place. The creature from before, the warning, the hand over his heart. Shaw met her eyes. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. Her brow furrowed slightly, then smoothed. You returned the touch. Out of instinct, he said quietly. Not understanding. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, she inclined her head. The heart bond. It was not forced. It was chosen, intention or no. Shaw stepped back, uneasy. What exactly does that mean? Heart bond? Marriage? She searched for the right words. Calvar is not like your bonding. It is not contract. It is vow, soul deep, a shared fate, between those who have saved and been saved. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. So, because I pulled you out of that wreckage, we're, what, bound? Forever? Yes, she said without hesitation. Until death or the breaking. What's the breaking? A severance, rare, painful, forbidden unless both hearts choose it. That sent a chill down his spine. She said it not like someone explaining a rule, but like someone who had seen it, survived it, barely. You don't even know me, he said, almost a whisper. Her expression softened just enough to register. That is not required. Time reveals the truth of the bond, but the fire is already lit. Shaw didn't respond. Couldn't really. He turned away, busied himself with checking her vitals again, though he barely registered the readouts. He hadn't meant to start anything. Hadn't meant to bind himself to someone, certainly not to someone like her. A warrior from a species he barely understood. But something in her tone, her calm certainty, made it impossible to call this a mistake. It was more than ritual, more than survival. When he finally looked back at her, she had already swung her legs over the side of the bed. Whoa, no, lie back down. You're not stable yet. I must move, she said. My muscles must wake. I cannot grow soft. You nearly died, he said firmly. You're not training. You're recovering. She looked at him like the word recovery was an alien concept. Do humans forbid motion after battle? We encourage rest after nearly bleeding out in a crater. Her lips curled, barely. Soft. He sighed and handed her the hydration pouch again. This time she took it. Drank. Eyes never leaving his face. There was still so much he didn't know. Why had she been alone out there? Where was her unit? Why had she sent a signal at all? Was she abandoned? Exiled? Lost? And then there was the question she wouldn't answer. Her name. That wasn't an oversight. That was a choice. Maybe it meant something sacred in her culture. Names given only when earned or only to equals. Or maybe she didn't trust him with it. Not yet. Fair enough. He wasn't sure he trusted himself either. The outpost lights flickered, then steadied. Outside, the storm was beginning to die down, leaving only a soft thrum in the air and the faint rattle of wind against the solar shields. Shaw leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. You going to tell me what happened out there? She didn't speak at first, just stared at the floor. When she finally answered, her voice was quieter than before. My unit fell. There was a hollowness in her tone, not regret, not grief. Just the echo of something that had already been buried. Ambushed? She nodded. We were outnumbered, outgunned. Orders were not changed. We died for nothing. That landed heavy. He knew the look in her eyes, the weight of loss. She didn't wear it with drama or theatrics, just a slow, bone-deep certainty that she should not have lived when the others hadn't. Why send a distress signal? He asked. You don't seem like someone who'd ask for help. She blinked slowly. I didn't. His stomach dropped. Then who? The ship, she said. Fail-safe protocol. If the life signs fall below 2, it transmits. Not meant to be answered. And yet here we are, he muttered. Silence again. When he looked at her, she wasn't watching him this time. She was staring at the flame bird tattoo on her own shoulder, as if remembering something too old to speak aloud. You should rest, he said gently. I have rested enough. He didn't argue, not because he agreed, but because he understood. People like her didn't know what to do with stillness. She stood on shaky legs, clutching the bed's edge for balance. Shaw stepped forward on reflex, but she shot him a glare that stopped him cold. She would fall before she asked for help, and he respected the hell out of that. Still, he stayed close. That night, they didn't speak much. She ate in silence, tried to walk the length of the room twice before collapsing back onto the bedding. He watched from the corner, quietly taking notes. The bond between them wasn't something either of them truly understood, but it was there, pulsing beneath the surface, threaded through every glance and silence. As she finally lay down again, wrapped in a blanket he'd pulled from the storage lockers, Shaw turned off the lights and let the low hum of the station return. He didn't know where this was going, didn't know what she expected from him, what he was allowed to expect from her. But something had changed the moment she said his name, and tomorrow they'd have to figure out what that meant, together. The storm had passed by morning, but the sky remained bruised and electric, thick clouds dragging lazy trails of static through the air, glowing faintly with residual charge. Shaw stood at the entrance of the outpost, arms crossed, staring out at the jagged horizon where ruin met silence. His breath misted in the cold, thin atmosphere. Even in full daylight, this planet never truly felt awake. He glanced back into the dim corridor behind him. She was still here, alive, moving, restless. The alien woman, his bonded if the stories were true, had spent the morning pacing the perimeter of the outpost, walking slow, tight circles around the metal corridors. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, but laced with that quiet kind of tension that Shaw recognized too well. She was a soldier without a battlefield, a blade without a target. Shaw rubbed his hands together, trying to warm his fingers. "You'll wear a trench in the floor if you keep that up." She stopped mid-step, turning to face him with that steady silver gaze. Her hair had dried into loose waves since the last storm, spilling down her back like ink. The green of her skin looked a little less pale today, and the deeper wounds were already beginning to heal, though her movements still held the edge of pain. "I must keep my blood moving," she said simply. "The body must remain ready." Shaw leaned against the doorframe. "You're still healing. You're allowed to take a moment to just not be ready." She gave him a look that almost resembled confusion. "There is no strength in stillness." "Sometimes stillness is the only thing that keeps you sane," he replied, then shrugged. "But what do I know?" A pause stretched between them, not cold, but cautious, like two people still figuring out the shape of the space between them. Finally, she moved toward the small crate of salvaged materials he'd left near the workbench. She crouched without effort, her hands grazing over the broken scraps of old drone parts, twisted metal, scorched polyweave. She wasn't looking for weapons. She was studying, rebuilding the world around her one piece at a time. Shaw stepped inside and shut the door behind him, letting the outpost's interior hum fill the silence. He approached her slowly, not wanting to intrude, but she spoke before he reached her. "The drone you mentioned last night, it was Kasari." "I figured," he replied. "Didn't know your people had enemies like that." She glanced up. "The Valari and the Kasari have fought for generations. Territory, faith, legacy. It is old blood, no longer clean." Shaw sat on a nearby crate. "And they'd be looking for you because I lived," she said. There was no pride in the statement, no triumph, just fact. She stood and turned to face him fully. The blanket she'd draped over her shoulders earlier had slipped down slightly, revealing more of the flamebird tattoo curling across her collarbone. Shaw had seen military insignias before, earned, branded, and honored, but nothing like this. It wasn't a symbol of rank. It felt older, more sacred. "Fifth Flame," he said, nodding toward the mark. She nodded once. "My line, my squad. The last bearer of that crest died before I was born. I was chosen to carry it, as they once carried it. It was not meant to end with me." "You survived," he said quietly. "That has to mean something." Her jaw tightened. Survival means nothing if the fire dies with it. He didn't respond. What could he say to that? He'd lived through failure too, but not the kind that haunted every breath like hers seemed to. "I don't even know your name," he said softly, shifting the conversation. She stilled. For a moment he thought she might ignore the question. Then she turned, gaze steady. "My name is Kalari." He repeated it in his mind. Kalari. A name shaped like a blade, elegant and strong. "It's a good name," he said. "Fierce. Suits you." Her expression didn't change, but he thought he saw something flicker behind her eyes. Maybe amusement, maybe gratitude. It passed too quickly to name. "I was not allowed to give it to you before," she said, "until the bond acknowledged spirit as well as body. And now it has." Her eyes dropped to his chest again, where her hand had pressed during the ritual. Now, yes. Shaw exhaled slowly. Then, I'm honored. Kalari tilted her head. Your customs do not demand such bonds. You are not bound to me by law, by culture. And yet you stay. I don't stay out of obligation, he said. She stepped forward, crossing the space between them slowly. Then why? He looked up at her, at the woman who had fought to survive, who had watched her comrades die, who had buried her pain under ritual and silence, and still rose to face each moment with clarity. Because you're alive, he said. Because you shouldn't have been, and I can't walk away from that. Another silence. This one quieter, deeper. I do not understand your kind, she said. You bleed freely. You speak pain like it is a friend. You embrace connection but fear its weight. And your kind, he asked? We fight. We win or die. We bond with blood and steel. We honor duty before desire. Shaw gave her a faint smile. Maybe somewhere in the middle of all that, we'll figure each other out. They stood there for a while, not talking, not needing to. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling against the outpost's reinforced walls like a distant whisper. Kalari eventually moved to the workbench and began sorting through materials, fingers deft and careful. Shaw joined her, handing her tools when she asked without a word. They didn't need translation anymore. Not for this. At some point she paused and glanced over at him. What happened to the person you lost? Shaw didn't look up right away. He stared at the circuit board in his hands, the rusted edge of an old connector. His name was Leo, he said quietly. Miran's younger brother. She was my partner. We were stationed in a relief zone on Eric 7. There was a bombing, coordinated, surgical. We were helping civilians evacuate when Leo got hit. I went left instead of right. Thought I had time. He swallowed. I didn't. Kalari said nothing, but her presence beside him steadied. It's why I answered the distress signal, he added. Even though I shouldn't have, even though it wasn't my job. You could have died, she said. I still might, she nodded slowly, but not without purpose. Shaw glanced at her. Is that what this is to you? Purpose? No, she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. This is something else. She didn't explain, didn't need to. That night, the power in the outpost flickered, as it always did when the winds climbed beyond a certain pressure. Shaw set emergency beacons around the perimeter. Kalari lit a series of small flame cores she pulled from a sealed case in her recovered gear. Simple, glowing stones that shimmered with blue light and gave off a low, pulsing warmth. They sat across from each other at the center of the outpost's common room, the glow between them like a living ember. What now? Shaw asked, voice low. Kalari looked at him through the light. We survive. We rebuild. We wait. For what? For the others who will come, the ones who will not ask questions. She didn't say the word Kasari, but he heard it anyway. Then we prepare, Shaw said. She nodded once. Together. And though nothing had changed in the world outside, though the ruins still lay broken, the war still echoed in the dust, and the sky still shivered with unshed storms, something inside that small, flickering space had shifted. They were not just allies now. Not just a man and a woman thrown together by chance and blood and ancient code. They were something else. Something real. And when Shaw finally lay down that night, Kalari resting a few feet away beneath her own cloak, he didn't dream of the past. For the first time in years, he dreamed of what came next. The wind howled again that night, low and mournful, rattling the outpost's rusted paneling like the breath of some ancient creature too tired to roar. Inside, the lights flickered against the cold, flicking between amber and dull blue, as power rerouted through the fallback grid Shaw had rigged the night before. The warmth was thin, but the silence, aside from the storm, was complete. Kalari sat cross-legged in the corner of the common room, her cloak wrapped around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the flame-core stone glowing between them. Shaw sat opposite her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The firelight danced in her silver eyes, casting shadows across the sharp angles of her face. He was learning to read her silences. Not every pause meant caution. Some were reverent, others were wounds. This one, he sensed, was both. How's the side? He asked eventually, voice low. Kalari didn't look up. The pain fades. The memory does not. Shaw nodded once. Memories don't fade. They get buried. That's not the same. Her gaze flicked to his. You speak from experience. He hesitated, then reached forward and adjusted the flame core slightly, letting the light fall fully across her tattoo. The bird of fire, once vivid and proud, looked softer now in the shifting glow. You said your unit was called the Fifth Flame, he said. Tell me what happened, the whole story. She studied him for a moment. Then she set her shoulders, let out a breath like she was preparing for a battle far older than anything this world had seen. We were 10, she began, voice even. 10 warriors bound by bloodlines, trained since birth in recon, strike tactics, sabotage. We were the edge of the spear, sent where others would not return. Shaw didn't interrupt. He could feel the weight of the words building. We received orders to intercept a Caesari convoy crossing disputed ground. Intelligence said the path was exposed. Minimal resistance. Our commander questioned it. We went anyway. Orders are not optional in our hierarchy. To refuse is dishonor. She paused, blinking slowly as if reliving the moment. We landed under fire, not from the convoy, from entrenched Caesari fire nests, mines, traps, old tech, primitive, crude, but effective. They knew we'd come, knew the approach path. Someone fed them our trajectory. Shaw's chest tightened. A setup. She nodded. One by one we fell. My bond sister was the last. She shielded me with her body when the transport failed. I was thrown clear in the explosion. The impact broke my ribs, shattered my leg. I crawled from the fire. Her voice grew quieter. There was no backup, no extraction signal, no return order. I dragged myself to the remains of the auxiliary pod, activated life support manually, then blacked out. The distress pulse, it must have activated on impact. I didn't call for help. I wouldn't have. You don't believe in asking for help, Shaw said, not accusing, just understanding. It is weakness in my caste, she replied. To survive what your unit did not is shameful, unless you carry back victory. And I had none. You had your life. I had failure. Shaw leaned back slightly, letting the words settle. Kailari's head remained bowed, the firelight painting her in shifting golds and reds. That wasn't failure, he said finally. That was survival. And it takes a different kind of strength to live when you weren't supposed to. She looked at him. Really looked. For once, her eyes weren't guarded. He saw the fracture lines behind them, the guilt, the questions, the unbearable stillness of a soldier with no war left to fight. You sound like someone who's had to convince himself of that, she said. Shaw didn't answer right away. He reached into the chest beside him and pulled out a small square device. He pressed a button, and a flickering blue projection came to life in the air above it. A blurry video feed, low quality, audio laced with static. A woman's voice played through the crackling hum, warm, calm. Shaw, evac's full. I'm taking Leo to the secondary port. We'll meet you on the southern rise. Kailari turned her eyes to the feed. The woman on screen, Miren, wore worn armor and a tired smile. Her eyes were dark, determined. She looked like someone who'd seen too much and chosen to keep moving anyway. She was my partner, Shaw said quietly. Her brother Leo was 16, too young. He wanted to prove himself. Got caught in the blast radius of a subsurface mine during a civilian pullout on Eric 7. Kailari listened, unmoving. I went east. Thought I had time. The signal was weak. I thought I could circle back. When I reached them, the building had collapsed. I dug for hours. His voice broke. I found him, but not in time. The projection died. I left the military after that, couldn't look anyone in the eye. Took contract engineering gigs on the outer worlds. Fewer people, fewer reminders. Until my signal, Kailari said softly. Shaw nodded. Until yours. Another silence. But this one didn't hurt. It held something different, a fragile understanding, like a bridge built between two people who didn't want to be saved, but had been anyway. You still carry them, she said. So do you. She looked away, then slowly reached down and unclipped a small pendant from under her armor, a shard of obsidian, engraved with the same flamebird crest. She handed it to him without ceremony. This belonged to my bond sister. Her name was Vakari. She once told me that fire doesn't die in ash. It hides, waits, finds new breath. Shaw held the pendant gently, like it might break under his fingers. She would have liked you, Kailari said, her voice distant. You don't talk like a warrior, but you endure like one. I'm not a warrior, Shaw said. Not anymore. I fix broken things. That's all. Kalari's eyes glinted. Then perhaps you were meant to find me. A sound cut through the stillness then, sharp, mechanical, and alert. Shaw stood instantly, crossing to the console. Kalari followed, her body tense despite the pain. On screen, a single red blip flashed on the outer perimeter. Heat signature, faint, moving slowly, circling. Recon drone, Kalari muttered. Same type as before, but this one's staying longer. Shaw zoomed in. The drone was scanning, searching for life forms. Its path was methodical, practiced. It's narrowing the radius, he said. Someone's trying to confirm something. Me, Kalari replied. They want proof I'm dead. And if they find out you're not? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Shaw killed the lights, powered down the main system, and rerouted to the emergency core. The outpost dimmed until it was little more than a shadow in the storm. They'll breach next time, Kalari said, her voice even. This was a scout. We'll be ready, he replied. You don't have to stay. He looked at her. I know, but I'm not going anywhere. She studied him for a long moment. Then with a quiet movement, she stepped forward, close. Her hand rose, not to touch his chest this time, but his jaw. It hovered there, uncertain, until Shaw leaned in just enough for her fingers to find skin. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something older, something that asked, "Are you still with me?" And his answer, quiet, unwavering, was yes. Outside, the wind screamed against the outpost. Inside, fire still lived, hidden, waiting. And for the first time, they faced the coming storm, not as strangers, not as savior and saved, but as something else. Two survivors. Two souls bound by pain, by instinct, and maybe, just maybe, by choice. The Kasari came at dawn, not with fanfare or thunder, but with the silent precision of predators that had studied their prey. They emerged from the haze, cloaked, silent, fast. Kalari had felt it moments before they arrived. A shift in the wind, a stillness in the metal. The kind of tension no sensor could detect, but every warrior knew by instinct. She had already reached for her blade when the first explosion hit the perimeter. Shaw, halfway through reconfiguring the old comms relay, dove behind the console as the shockwave rippled through the outpost. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. The lights flickered once, then dimmed. "Contact! North wall breached!" he shouted, already scrambling for the rifle she'd handed him the day before. Kalari was already moving. Two enemy soldiers burst through the smoke, their armor glinting like polished bone. She met them head-on, spinning beneath the first strike and driving her elbow into a throat plate. The second came at her flank. She pivoted, took the blow against her ribs with a grimace, and countered with a slash that opened the attacker from collar to waist. Blood hit the walls. Shaw watched from the console, heart racing. "South corridor," he called. "Movement, 2 more. I'll hold the core," she shouted back. He nodded and moved to flank, taking position behind a support beam. He fired twice, clean shots, one to the chest, one to the leg. Not enough to kill, but enough to stall. The Kasari reeled, stumbled, and Kalari closed in like a shadow with teeth. Her blade sang as it struck metal and bone alike, but they just kept coming. More bodies, more smoke, more noise. Shaw lost count. At some point, the floor under his feet trembled again, and a second breach blew open the western wall. They were being surrounded. Then, chaos. A flash grenade detonated near the comm array. A figure leapt through the haze, blade raised. Shaw saw it too late, but Kalari didn't. She threw herself between him and the attacker with no hesitation. Her shoulder caught the blade's edge. Blood arced through the air. She didn't cry out. She simply turned, drove her knee into the enemy's chest, and finished the job. Shaw caught her as she stumbled. "You're bleeding." "So are you," she replied, pressing her palm briefly to his chest. Not a ritual now. A check, a reassurance. They fought side by side for another 10 minutes, maybe longer. Time became elastic. Then, finally, the attackers broke. The remaining Kasari pulled back, retreating into the dust and smoke they'd arrived with. And then, silence. Not the silence of peace. The silence after. Kalari sat now on the edge of the supply crate, her breathing shallow. Her blade, notched and bloodied, lay across her lap. Her armor was split at the ribs, deep red, leaking from the wound. Shaw crouched beside her, blood smeared across his cheek, knuckles raw. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly, unsealing the med pack. Kalari turned her head, her voice thin. You were about to die. You almost did instead. Her eyes met his. That is the bond. Shaw didn't answer. His hands were already moving, cleaning the wound, sealing the gash with foam, wrapping her side with what little sterile gauze they had left. She didn't flinch, but she didn't look away from him either. The Kalvar isn't just tradition for you, is it? He asked softly. Kalari was silent for a moment. Then, it was. She reached for his wrist, fingers curling over his skin. But now it's you. Shaw let out a shaky breath, the weight of that confession settling between them. I didn't understand what it meant when I saved you, he said. But I know why I did it. I couldn't lose someone again, not like before. Leo, she said. He nodded once. This time I didn't run the wrong way. Kalari touched her forehead briefly to his, then pulled back. And I didn't die alone. Shaw sat beside her, his shoulder pressing gently against hers. They didn't speak for a while. The outpost around them hissed, creaked, settled into its new state of ruin. Finally, Shaw stood. We need to get out of here. They'll come back. Next time we won't hold. Kalari rose slowly, her hand brushing over the broken comm relay. Can this still work? I don't know. Maybe. He tapped the housing with his knuckle. If I can patch it into one of the drone cores, maybe I can get enough charge to send out a signal. To whom? Anyone still listening? Kalari's gaze lingered on him. Even if it means returning to your kind? Shaw gave a tired smile. If they come, I'll go with them. But not without you. You risk exile. He turned to her. Then let them exile me. But they'll do it knowing I kept someone alive when it mattered. She hesitated, then nodded once. Then I will stay at your side, even in exile. They worked together side by side, stripping parts from the shattered drones and routing power lines into the old relay. Sparks flew. Shaw cursed more than once. Kalari simply held the housing open and passed tools with the precision of a warrior who had adapted to survival through grit and grace. An hour passed, then two, and then life. The relay core blinked, then hummed. A low pulse traveled through the wiring, and Shaw nearly laughed. Signal's live, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Kalari's lips curled faintly. Then we wait. He turned to her. Number we hope. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, Kalari looked at him and nodded. Not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as someone who finally believed in the possibility of after. They sat in the wreckage of the outpost, scarred, bloodied, exhausted, but side by side. Alive, bound, together, and somewhere, beyond the dead stars and broken skies, someone was listening. The storm had broken, not with thunder, but with silence. That unnatural hush had followed the final moments of the Kasari attack, spreading like a shroud across the ruined outpost. Smoke clung to the walls, and blood had dried in streaks where it had been flung. The corridors bore new scars, fresh evidence of a battle hard won but far from glorious. And through it all, the soft, persistent hum of the comm relay continued, steady, fragile, but alive. Shaw stood over the terminal, his fingers twitching slightly as he calibrated the transmission frequency. He hadn't slept. He barely remembered how to blink, but the console's pale blue glow had become a lifeline, one he wasn't ready to let go of yet. Behind him, Kalari leaned against the frame of the shattered doorway, arms crossed over her chest, her posture deceptively calm. Her injuries were worse than she admitted, deep bruising along her ribs, cuts lacing her shoulders, a slice across her temple still seeping, but she refused to be treated further. Her pride wouldn't let her, not until she knew whether this fragile signal they'd reignited would reach someone before the next wave of enemies did. They'll come, Shaw said quietly, more to himself than her. Do you trust them to? She asked. He turned, meeting her gaze. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a question, a test. I trust that someone out there will hear it, that someone still remembers how to listen. Kalari stepped into the room, her footsteps soft, despite the weight in her limbs. Hope, she murmured. A human virtue. Sometimes a flaw, he said. Sometimes the only thing that gets you out of bed. She tilted her head slightly. In my culture, hope is for those who wait. Action is for those who survive. Shaw offered a tired smile. We've done both. She didn't argue. Instead, she reached past him, brushing her fingers over the side of the relay housing. It was warm now, humming with a pulse like a second heartbeat. Her eyes remained on it for a moment before she spoke again. When I was first chosen for the fifth flame, my bloodline mentor told me, "Your duty is to endure. Your life is not yours anymore." I believed her. Shaw watched her, the weight behind her words settling between them like gravity. But now, she looked at him. I wonder if life is still something we can claim, even after everything. He took a breath. We've earned the right to decide what comes next. Kalari studied him, and for a long moment her expression was unreadable. Then, "Do you remember the moment I placed my hand on your chest?" He nodded. "Yeah, I didn't understand it then. I do now." "It was not only a vow," she said. "It was an acceptance of what I could not control. You, Shaw, were the choice I made without knowing it, but I do not regret it." His throat tightened. "Neither do I." Silence again, but this time it felt warmer. She moved closer. He didn't flinch when she touched him, lightly, reverently. Her hand pressed again to his chest, not as part of a ritual, but to feel what she'd once claimed without consent, the heartbeat beneath his skin. He covered her hand with his own, their fingers interlocked. "Do you still fear what the bond means?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I don't. I think I feared not having a choice, but I do. And I choose this. I choose you." For a moment neither spoke. There was only breath and the soft, mechanical rhythm of the relay behind them. Then Kalari leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently to his, a gesture that had once been sacred and strange, but now felt like home. Outside, the wind stirred the ruins. The sky had begun to shift, its colors bleeding from sickly gray into a dim, powder blue dawn that barely touched the horizon. Shaw had forgotten what time of day it was. He didn't care. They stayed like that until the comm pinged. A short, stuttered tone, erratic but deliberate. Shaw blinked, turned, and scanned the terminal. The frequency display had shifted. A signal. "I've got something," he breathed. Kalari stepped beside him, her stance instantly alert. "Is it Alliance?" Shaw adjusted the dial, isolating the feed. Static filled the room, then cleared. "This is Recon Vessel Theta 7 responding to emergency pulse from Outpost Delta 7, receiving partial transmission, confirm life signs." Shaw exhaled sharply. "That's a real Alliance signature." "They heard us." He grabbed the mic and keyed it open. "This is Shaw, one human, one Valari, confirmed life signs, coordinates embedded. Repeat, this is not a decoy. We are alive." A pause, the kind that could crush hope if it lingered too long. Then, "Copy that, Delta 7. Coordinates locked. ETA 6 hours. Hold your position." Shaw sat down hard on the nearest crate. The breath he'd been holding for what felt like a year finally left his lungs. Kalari didn't speak. She just crouched beside him, her hand resting on his knee. 6 hours. That was all they needed now. Just 6 hours. But survival wasn't the only question anymore. A new one had emerged. Quieter, more intimate. "What happens when they arrive?" she asked. Shaw turned toward her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "Your people. They may see me as a threat, a complication. Our bond, in their eyes, could be inappropriate." He reached for her hand again. "Then I'll tell them. It's not their call. They may offer you reassignment, safe passage. A life without politics, without me." Shaw looked her dead in the eye. "Then they'll be offering it to the wrong man." Her lips parted slightly, not in disbelief, but something gentler. He could see the tension in her jaw loosen. She'd braced for rejection. She wouldn't say it out loud, but he saw it. "I don't need to go back to what I was," he added. "Before this, I was just existing. You gave me something real. I'm not walking away from it." Kalari's shoulders eased. For a Valari warrior, it was as vulnerable as weeping. She stood slowly, her fingers still linked with his. "Then I will stand beside you, no matter the cost." "Then we wait," he said. "No," she replied, stepping closer, her voice lower now. "We begin." Shaw met her halfway. There was no ceremony, no hesitation. Their kiss wasn't rushed or fiery. It was quiet, deliberate, full of the things they hadn't needed to say. It wasn't about possession or passion, but belonging. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers. His breath caught as her hand slid to the side of his neck, holding him steady as if anchoring them both in that moment. The war, the bond, the blood between them, none of it mattered now. Only this did. Only choice. Only love. When they finally pulled apart, the room was still, not empty, but full of something unspoken, something earned. Shaw brushed his thumb across her cheek, smudging a line of ash away. No more running, no more hiding. No more alone, she answered. They sat together through the last hours of that long night, their backs pressed against each other in the broken stillness, waiting not for rescue, but for what came next. And when the stars began to appear through the thinning clouds, they didn't look like distant lights anymore. They looked like witnesses to survival, to bond, to love, freely chosen in a place meant to destroy it. And somewhere beyond the wreckage of war and memory, the future waited, not promised, but possible. And this time they would walk into it together. The ship arrived just as the first true sunlight broke over the fractured horizon. It wasn't the harsh, flickering glare they were used to, the filtered pulses through ash clouds and storm-wrecked sky. This light was thinner, paler, but clean, unfiltered. A reminder that even on a world as broken as this, light could still make it through. The rescue vessel descended like a ghost, smooth and soundless. Shaw and Kalari watched from the edge of the outpost, standing shoulder to shoulder, backs straight despite exhaustion. Around them, the ruins stretched in quiet testimony to the battle they'd survived. "I didn't think it would feel like this," Shaw said softly. Kalari glanced at him. "Like what?" "Like leaving something behind and not wanting to." The words settled between them. The ship's landing gear hissed against cracked stone, and a docking ramp extended slowly. The Alliance insignia gleamed along its side, pristine, untouched by this world's grime. He had once called that symbol a promise. Now it looked like a question. Two figures emerged, medics in gray uniforms, moving quickly but cautiously, scanning the area. They paused when they saw the pair waiting calmly outside, weapons sheathed, no resistance in their posture. "Shaw?" one of them called out. He raised a hand. "That's me." The medic jogged forward, hand already moving to a scanner. "You're lucky the signal got through. This planet's on no one's radar anymore." Shaw gestured toward the broken relay tower, wires still snaking across the ground. "It took some improvising." The medic's eyes flicked to Kalari and he stiffened slightly. She held herself taller, watching without blinking. "And she?" "She's with me," Shaw said firmly. "Her name is Kalari. She's a warrior of the Valari, and she saved my life." The medic hesitated. "There'll be questions, reports, there always are," Shaw said. "But the answers are simple." The other officer had approached now, his gaze harder, more calculating. "You're bonded to her." Shaw didn't deny it. "I am." The officer opened his mouth, but Kalari spoke before he could. "The Kalvar was not forced. It was chosen. It stands." Her voice had the weight of something ancient, unyielding. The officer held her gaze for a long moment, testing, weighing, but then nodded. "Understood. For now, we're here to extract and stabilize. Politics can wait." Shaw looked to Kalari. "We go together." She inclined her head, as one. Inside the ship, the difference was jarring. Clean walls, filtered air, functioning lights that didn't flicker, the scent of sterilized corridors instead of plasma and rust. It felt safe, but not familiar. Not yet. Kalari sat across from Shaw in the medical bay as technicians moved around them, checking vitals, scanning injuries, issuing supplies. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. It wasn't silence from fear anymore. It was peace. A new kind of quiet. At some point, the commanding officer entered, tall, lean, graying at the temples, a career man. His eyes settled on Shaw first, then Kalari. "We've reviewed your situation," he began, tone neutral. "There's no precedence for this specific bond, but under Article 8 of the Intercultural Unity Accords, mutual defense and confirmed consent grant you temporary co-citizenship." Shaw arched a brow. "Temporary? You'll need to present yourselves for formal review. It's a process. Paperwork, trials perhaps. Some of our worlds won't approve easily." Kalari stood. "Then we will stand together." The commander paused, then nodded. "That's your right. And by the looks of the field report, you've earned more than that." He stepped forward and handed Shaw a datapad. "This contains your service exemption. You're free to choose where you go from here. There's a transport heading toward the settled zones in a few days. Neutral territories, fewer eyes." Shaw took the pad, glanced at it, and then looked at Kalari. That work for you? She tilted her head, the faintest smile at the edge of her mouth. As long as we build, not run. I like building. She took his hand. The officer nodded once more and left them in silence. Later, as the ship left orbit, Shaw stood at the viewport, watching the planet below shrink into a cracked marble of blue-gray. Kalari joined him, shoulder brushing against his. That world tried to kill us, he said. It tried, she agreed. But it also gave me something I didn't know I was looking for. Kalari looked at him, her voice quieter now. What was that? Home. She turned fully to him, her expression solemn but her eyes warm. Then we carry it with us. Shaw nodded. Wherever we go. They didn't speak again until the stars returned. Clear, sharp, no longer veiled by dust storms and electromagnetic haze. Kalari reached toward the viewport, pressing her palm lightly to the glass. In my tongue, there is no single word for love, only phrases. Like what? She looked at him. Tirka Shavari. It means, you are the flame I chose to follow through the dark. Shaw stared at her for a long moment. Something caught in his throat. He moved toward her, pulling her into his arms. She didn't resist. Her head rested against his shoulder, their breaths sinking, their bodies relaxed for the first time since the war began. And above them, the stars burned quiet and bright, not as judgment, but as witness, not to war, not to tradition, but to choice, to fire and survival, to two souls who had every reason to walk away, and chose each other instead, always. It had been 32 days since they'd left the war-torn skies of Delta 7 behind. The world they lived on now didn't have a name that meant anything to most people. It wasn't marked on trade maps, didn't host any diplomatic outposts or military interest. It was a quiet, temperate moon orbiting a gas giant, settled by a handful of hybrid communities where humans and off-worlders lived in peace, far from the reach of bureaucrats and broken treaties. They lived in a house they'd helped build themselves, half from salvaged parts of the outpost's remains, half from local materials. It overlooked a lake that shimmered in hues of violet and soft gold during sunset, and each evening, a cooling wind would roll over the ridgeline, stirring the tall, whispering grasses outside their window. Shaw stood barefoot in the doorway now, sipping from a metal mug that still bore the scratches from his field kit. Inside, the hearth crackled with blue-white flame, Valari Firestone, a gift from Kalari's people once word of her survival spread and her name was cleared. She had been forgiven, but more than that, she had been seen and chosen. He turned at the sound of soft footsteps. Kalari entered from the far hallway, wrapped in a loose robe that fell off one shoulder, her long black hair damp from the outdoor spring. Her green skin caught the warm firelight like polished jade. Shaw's breath caught, just like it always did. You're staring again, she said, her voice soft and teasing. Can you blame me? He murmured. She smiled, truly smiled. Not the guarded curve of lips from their days on the edge of war, but the kind that touched her eyes. The kind that came only when she forgot to be afraid. You said there'd be coffee, she said, eyeing his mug. He handed it to her without a word. She took a slow sip, then scrunched her nose at the bitterness. This is horrible. It's authentic, he said with a grin. Bitter means strong. So says every stubborn human male I've ever met. I'm the only one you've ever met. Exactly, she said, leaning up to kiss the corner of his mouth. He caught her waist gently, pulling her close. She didn't resist. Her hands slid up his back, fingertips brushing over bare skin with lazy reverence. He rested his forehead against hers, breath mingling in the quiet between them. I like this life, she said softly. Yeah? His voice was a whisper now. I like the quiet, the stars without sirens, the way you look at me like I'm not a weapon. You never were, he said. I used to think I had to be, that being loved meant being useful, being worthy of protection. But you, her voice caught, you just love me. I do, he said, brushing his fingers against her cheek. Her eyes shimmered. I love you, Kalari, he said again, more firmly. I loved you the moment you stood in front of me, wounded and proud and refused to die. I love you for the fire, and the strength, and the silence, and the way you still put up with my terrible coffee. Her lips curved upward, trembling slightly. Then I am lucky. No, he said, we both are. She leaned in, capturing his mouth in a kiss, deep, slow, full of the warmth they'd fought so hard to earn. It was not the desperate kiss of survivors or the fierce claim of bondmates. It was gentle, familiar, a language of its own. When they parted, Kalari rested her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Outside, the twin moons had risen, casting long silver light across the lake. Somewhere, the nightbirds called, and the world turned as if it had never known war. She pulled away slightly, just enough to reach for a small carved stone that lay on the mantel. It was smooth, dark, etched with the flame bird of her lineage. But now it bore a second mark beneath it, an engraved circle, the old Terran symbol for unity. She held it up. "You know what this means?" "Our lives," he said. "Together." She nodded and slid it into his hand. "It's time." He blinked. "Now?" She smiled. "Yes." Outside, beneath the open stars, they walked barefoot into the garden they'd planted together. Rich soil turned with both their hands. Shaw stood opposite her, hands shaking slightly as Kalari took out a small braid of flame thread and tied it between their wrists, an old Valari tradition, adapted for this new path. "No elders," she said. "No weapons. No war. Just you and me. Just us," he whispered. Their foreheads touched, breath to breath, heart to heart. And with the quiet wind and 1,000 stars as witness, Shaw Rowe and Kalari of the Fifth Flame were married, not by decree, not by ritual, but by choice, by love, by the fire they'd carried through the dark. And when she whispered, "I love you," into his ear that night, it was not with uncertainty or awe. It was with certainty, because finally they were not surviving. They were living, together, always.